Hello, readers and radicals. My name is TB Skyn, and welcome to a bit of an experiment, basically. So, people have been saying for a while that they want me to narrate something, because I guess they like my voice and they would like to hear what that sounds like when it's reading like a story or something. And that's very flattering, but you may notice that I haven't really done much of that at all. And the reason why is, it's algorithms again, I know. Because even on this secondary channel right here, if I were to just post like a static screen with me reading something, or even if I were to record myself like with a camera reading something, the algorithm would detect that, oh, hang on, that's not video gaming content, and then it would be like, but that's not the same kind of content you usually post, and then the algorithm would screw the entire channel over, which I started this channel because I didn't want to worry too much about the algorithms, but now, like, I do want people to be able to at least find these goddamn things. I don't want this thing to get buried for no good reason just because I want to do an experiment. So, I've come up with a little bit of a compromise, which is to say that I've recorded a bunch of Stardew Valley footage, and that's going to be running in the background while I read you, well, in this case, it's just going to be one little short story. If you want to know the mods that I'm using in this Stardew Valley gameplay, by the way, there's going to be a list of those down in the description. There's quite a few of them at this point, actually. I have modded the heck out of that game, and good lord have I spent too many hours in it. Anyway, the story that I want to read you is called Once and Future, and just from the title, maybe you'll be able to guess what it concerns itself with. It's by Terry Pratchett. It's from a collection of his short fiction called A Blink of the Screen, which you should be able to find in any good bookstore, or even in some of the crappy ones, I suppose, if you're lucky. And it opens on a quote from another book. When the matins were done, the congregation filed out into the yard. They were confronted by a marble block, into which had been thrust a beautiful sword. The block was 4 feet square, and the sword passed through a steel anvil, which had been stuck in the stone, and which projected a foot from it. The anvil had been inscribed with letters of gold. Whoso pulleth outer this sword of this stone and anviled is rightwise king born of all Bretagne. From La Morte d'Arthur, by Sir Thomas Malory. And so we get into the story. The copper wire. It was the copper wire that gave me trouble. It's all down to copper wire. The old alchemists used to search for gold, if only they'd known what a man and a girl can do with copper wire. And a tide mill. And a couple of hefty bars of soft iron. And here I am now with this ridiculous staff in one hand and the switch under my foot. Waiting. I wish they wouldn't call me Merlin. It's Mervyn. There was a Merlin, I found out, a mad old guy who lived in Wales and died years ago. But there were legends about him, and they're being welded onto me now. I reckon that happens all the time. Half the famous guys of history are just like a lot of local guys all rolled into one by the ballad singers. Remember Robin Hood? Well, technically, I suppose I can't, because none of the rascals who went under that name will be born for several centuries yet, even if he is due to exist in this universe, so using the word remember is probably the wrong, the wrong grammar. Can you remember something that hasn't happened yet? I can. Nearly everything I remember hasn't happened yet, but that's how it goes in the time travel business. Gone today? And here tomorrow. Oh, here comes another one of them. A strapping lad, legs like 4 beer kegs stacked in pairs, shoulders like an ox, a brain like an ox too, I shouldn't wonder. Hand like a bunch of bananas gripping the sword. No. Oh no, my lad. You're not the one. Grit your teeth all you like, you're not the one. There he goes. His arm will be aching for days. You know, I suppose I'd better tell you about this place, about this time. Well, whenever it is. I had special training for time traveling. The big problem is finding out when you are. Basically, when you step out of a time machine, you can't rely on seeing a little sign that says, "Welcome to 500 AD, gateway to the Dark Ages, population 10 million and falling." Sometimes you can't even rely on finding anyone within a day's march who knows what year it is, or what king is on the throne, or what a king is. So, you learn to look at things like church architecture, the way the fields are farmed, the shape of the plowshares, that sort of thing. Yeah, I know. You've seen films where there's this little dinky alphanumerical display in the machine that tells you exactly where you are. Yeah, forget it. It's all dead reckoning in this game. Real primitive stuff. You start out by checking the constellations with a little gadget because they tell me the stars are all moving around all the time, and you can get a very rough idea of when you are just by looking through the thing and reading off calibrations. If you can't even recognize the constellations, the best thing to do is to run and hide, because something 40 feet tall and covered with scales is probably hunting you already. Plus, they give you a guide to various burned-out supernovas and Stoffler's craters of the moon by estimated creation date. With any luck, you can pinpoint yourself 50 years either way. Then, it's just a matter of checking planetary positions for the fine-tuning. Try to imagine sea navigation around the time of Columbus. A bit hit or miss, yeah? Well, time navigation is just about at the same level. Everyone said I must be one great wizard to spend so much time studying the sky. No, that's just because I was trying to find out when I was. Because the sky tells me I'm around AD 500. So why is the architecture Norman and the armor 15th century? Oh, hold on. Here comes another one. Well, not your actual Einstein, but he could be... No. Look at that grip. Look at that rage. No, he's not the one. Not him. Oh, sorry about that. So, right, where was I? Memory like a sieve these days. Oh, yeah, the architecture. And everyone speaking a sort of Middle English, which was okay as it turned out, because I can get by in that, having accidentally grounded in 1479 once. That was where I met John Gutenberg, father of the modern printing press? Yeah, tall man, bushy whiskers, still owes me a tuppence. Anyway, back to this trip. It was obvious from the start that things weren't quite right. This time, they were supposed to be sending me to observe the crowning of Charlemagne in AD 800, and here I was in the wrong country, and according to the sky, about 3 centuries too soon. That's the kind of thing that happens. Like I said, it's gonna be at least 50 years before we get it right. 53 years, actually, because I met a man in a bar in 1875 who's from 100 years in our future, and he told me. I told them at base, we might as well save a lot of effort by just, bribing one of the future guys for the plans for the next model. They said if we violated the laws of cause and effect like that, there's a good chance that the whole universe would suddenly catastrophically collapse into this tiny bubble 0.05 angstroms across. But I say it's got to be worth a try. Oh, anyway, the copper wire gave me a load of trouble. Although that's not to say I'm incompetent. I'm just an average guy in every respect, except that I'm the one in 10,000 who can time travel and still end up with all his marbles. It just gives me a slight headache. And I'm good at languages, and I'm a very good observer, and you'd better believe I've observed some strange things. The Charlemagne coronation was going to be a vacation. It was my second visit, actually, paid for by a bunch of historians in some university somewhere. I was going to check a few things that the guys who commissioned the first trip had raised after reading my report. I had it all worked out, where I was going to stand and make sure I didn't see myself. I probably could have talked my way out of it, even if I hadn't met myself, actually. One thing you learn in this trade is the gift of the gab. And then a diode blew, or a 1 turned out to be a 0, and here I am, whenever this is. And I can't get back. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, incidentally, the other problem with the copper wire is getting the insulation. In the end, I wrapped it up in fine cloth, and we painted every layer with some sort of varnish they use on their shields, which seems to have done the trick. And, well, I think time traveling affects the memory. Like, your memory subconsciously knows the things that you're remembering haven't happened yet, and this upsets it in some way. There's whole bits of history I can't remember. I wish I knew what they were. Excuse me a moment, here comes another one. An oldish guy, quite bright by the look of him. Why, I bet he can probably write his own name, but... Oh, I don't know. He hasn't got the, He hasn't got I wish I knew what it was he hasn't got. Charisma! I knew it was in there somewhere. So, anyway, yeah. So there I was, 3 centuries adrift and nothing working. Have you ever seen a time machine? Probably not. The bit you move around is very, very hard to see unless the light catches it just right. The actual works of the machine are back at base, and at the same time they're in the machine, so you travel in something like a mechanical ghost, something like what's left of a machine when you take all the parts away. An idea of a machine. Think of it as a big crystal. That's what it would look like to you if, as I said, the light was right. I woke up in what I suppose I would have to call a bed. Just straw and heather, with a blanket made of itches woven together. And there was this girl trying to feed me soup. Don't even try to imagine medieval soup. It's all made of the stuff they wouldn't eat if it was on a plate. And believe me, they would eat stuff you would hate to put in a hamburger. I'd been there, I found out later, for 3 days. I didn't even know I had arrived. I'd been wandering around in the woods, half-conscious and dribbling, a side effect of the traveling. Like I said, normally I just get a headache. But from what I can remember of that, it was jet lag times 1,000,000. If it had been winter, I would have been dead. If there had been cliffs, I would have thrown myself over one. As it was, I just walked into a few trees, and that was by accident. At least I'd avoided the wolves and bears, or maybe they'd avoided me. Maybe they think you die if you eat a crazy person. Her father was a woodcutter, or a charcoal burner, or one of those things. Never did find out which one. Or maybe I did, and I've just forgotten. He used to go out every day with an axe, I remember that. He'd found me and brought me home. I learned afterwards he thought I was a nobleman because of my fine clothes. Now, I was wearing Levi's at the time. That should give you some idea. He had 2 sons, and they went out every day with axes too. Never really managed to strike up a conversation with either of them until after the father's accident. I didn't know enough about axes to make conversation, I suppose. Oh, but Nimue, what a girl. She was only... How old were you when we met? She wipes her hands on a bit of rag. We had to grease the bearings with pig fat. 15, she says. I think. Listen, there's another hour of water above the mill, but I don't think the generator will last that long. It's shaking right merrily. She looks speculatively at the nobles. What a bunch of By Our Lady jacks, she says. Jocks. Yeah, jocks. I shrug. One of them will be your king, I tell her. Not my king, Mervyn. I will never have a king, she says, and grins. By which you can tell she's learned a lot in 12 months. Yes, I broke the rules and told her the truth, and why not? I've broken all the rules to save this damn country, and it doesn't look like the universe is turning into this tiny ball 0.05 angstroms across anytime soon. First, I don't think this is our timeline. It's all wrong. Like I said, I think I was knocked sideways into some other sort of history. Maybe a history that will never really exist except in people's heads, because, well, time travel is a fantasy anyway. You hear mathematicians talk about imaginary numbers which are real, so I reckon that this is an imaginary place, made up of real things. Or something. How should I know? Perhaps enough people believing something makes it real? I'd ended up in Albion, as it turns out, although I didn't find out until much later. Not in Britain, not in England, a place very much like them, a place that shares a lot of things with them, a place so close to them that maybe ideas and stories leak across, but a place that is its own place. Only, something went wrong somewhere. There was someone missing. There should have been a great king. You could fill in his name. He's out there somewhere in the crowd. It's lucky for him I turned up. Oh, you want me to describe this world. You want to hear about the jousts and the pennants and the castles. Right. It's got all of that, but everything has this, thin film of mud over it. The difference between the average peasant's hut and a pigsty is that a good farmer will sometimes change the straw in a pigsty. Now, get me right, no one's doing any repressing, so far as I can see. There's no slavery as such, except, well, slavery to tradition, but tradition does wield a heavy lash. I mean, maybe democracy isn't perfect, but at least we don't let ourselves get outvoted by the dead. And since there is no strong man in charge, there's a little would-be king in every valley, and he spends most of his time fighting other would-be kings, and so the whole country is in a state of half-hearted war. And everyone goes through life proudly doing things clumsily because their forefathers did them that way, and no one really enjoys anything, and good fields are filling with weeds. I told Nimue I came from another country, which was true enough. I talked to her a lot because she was the only one with any sense around the place. She was small and skinny and alert in the same way that a bird is alert. I said I broke the rules to save the country, but if I'm honest, I'll have to say I did it all for her. She was the one bright thing in a world of mud. She's nice to have around. She learns quickly, and, well, I've seen what the women here look like by the time they're 30. That shouldn't happen to anyone. She talked, and she listened to me while she did the housework, if that's what you can call moving the dirt around until it gets lost. I told her about the future. Why not? What harm could it do? But she wasn't very impressed. I guess she didn't know enough to be impressed. I mean, men on the moon were all one with the fairies and the saints to her. But piped water caught her interest because every day she had to go to a spring with a couple of wooden buckets on a yoke around her neck. "Every cottage has this?" she said, eyeing me carefully over the top of the broom. "Sure." "Not just the rich?" The rich have more bathrooms," I said. Then I had to explain about bathrooms. "You people could do it," I told her. "You just need to dam up a spring in the hills and find a blacksmith or someone to make copper pipes. Or iron. Or lead, in a pinch." She looked wistful. "My father wouldn't allow it," she said. "Surely he'll see the benefits of having water laid on," I suggested. She shrugged. "Why should he? He doesn't carry it from the spring." Oh. But she took to following me around in what time there was between chores. It's just as I've always said. Women have always had the greater stake in technology than the men. We'd still be living in trees otherwise. Piped water, electric lighting, stoves that you don't need to shove wood into. I reckon that behind half the great inventors of history were their wives, nagging them into finding cleaner ways of doing the chores. Nimue trailed me, like a spaniel, as I tottered around their village. If you could use that term for a collection of huts that looked like something deposited in the last ice age, or possibly by a dinosaur with a really serious bowel problem. She even let me into the forest, where I finally found the machine in a thorn thicket. Totally unrepairable. The only hope was that someone might fetch me, if they ever worked out where I was. And I knew that they never would, because, well, if they ever did, they would have been here already. Even if it took them 10 years to work it out in their time, they could still come back to the here and now. I mean, that's the thing about time travel. You have all the time in the world. I was marooned. However, we experienced travelers always carry a little something to tide us over the bad times. I'd got a whole box of stuff under the seat. A few small gold ingots, acceptable everywhere like the best credit cards. Pepper, worth more than gold for hundreds of years. Aluminium, a rare and precious metal in the days before cheap and plentiful electricity. And seeds and pencils. And enough drugs to start a store. Oh, don't tell me about herbal remedies. People screamed down the centuries trying to stop things like dental abscesses with any green junk that happened to be growing in the mud. She watched me, owlishly, while I sorted through the stuff, and I told her what it all did. And then the next day her father cut his leg open with an axe. The brothers carried him home. I stitched him up, and with her eyes on me, I treated the wound. A week later, he was walking around again, instead of being a cripple at best, or, well, more likely, a gangrenous corpse. And I was a hero. Or, well, rather, since I didn't have the muscles to be a hero, I was obviously a wizard. I was mad to act like that. You're not supposed to meddle, but what the hell? I was marooned. I was never going home. I didn't care. And I could cure, which is almost as powerful as being able to kill. I taught hygiene. I taught them about turnips and running water and basic medicine. The boss of the valley was a decent enough old knight called Sir Ector. Nimue knew him, which surprised me, but shouldn't have. The old boy was only one step up from his peasants and seemed to know them all and wasn't much richer than they were, except that history had left him with a crumbling castle and a suit of rusty armor. Nimue went up to the castle one day a week to be a kind of lady's maid for his daughter. After I pulled the bad teeth that had been making his life hell, old Ector swore eternal friendship and gave me the run of the place. I met his son Kay, a big-hearted lad with the muscles of an ox and possibly the brains of one, and there was this daughter to whom nobody seemed to want to introduce me properly, perhaps because she was very attractive in a quiet kind of way. She had one of those stares that seemed to be reading the inside of your skull. She and Nimue got along like sisters. Well, they got along like sisters that get along well, I mean. I became a big man in the neighborhood. It's amazing the impression you can make with a handful of medicine, some basic science, and a good line of bullshit. Poor old Merlin had left a hole, which I filled like water in a cup. There wasn't a man in the country who wouldn't listen to me, and whenever she had a spare moment, Nimue followed me, watching like an owl. I suppose at the time I had some dream, like the Connecticut Yankee, of single-handedly driving the society into the 20th century. You might as well try pushing the sea with a broom. But they do what you tell them, Nimue said. She was helping me in the lab at the time, I think. I call it the lab. It was just a room in the castle. I was trying to make penicillin. That's exactly it, I told her. And what good is that? The moment I turn my back, they go back to the same old ways. I thought you told me a democracy was where people did what they wanted to do, she said. It's a democracy, I said, and it's fine for people to do what they want, provided they do what's right. She bit her lip thoughtfully. That does not sound sensible. Well, that's how it works. And when we have a democracy, every man says who shall be king? Something like that, yeah. And what do the women do? I had to think about that. Oh, they should have the vote too, I said. Eventually. It'll take some time. I don't think Albion is ready for female suffrage. It has female suffrage already, she said, with unusual bitterness. Suffrage. It means the right to vote. I patted her hand. Anyway, I told her, you can't start with a democracy. You have to work up through stuff like tyranny and monarchy first. That way, people are so relieved when they get to democracy that they hang on to it. People used to do what the king told them, she said, carefully measuring bread and milk into the shallow bowls. The High King, I mean. Everyone did what the High King said, even the lesser kings. I'd heard about this High King. In his time, apparently, the land had flowed with so much milk and honey people must have needed waiters to get around. I don't go for that kind of thing. I'm a practical man. When people talk about their great past, they're usually trying to make excuses for the mediocre present. Such a person might get things done, I said. But then they die and history shows, or history will show, but I couldn't really tell her that things go back to being even worse when they die. Take it from me. Is that one of those things you call a figure of speech, Mervyn? Sure. There was a child, they say, hidden somewhere by the king until it was old enough to protect itself. From wicked uncles and so on? I do not know about uncles. I heard men say that many kings hated the power of Uther Pendragon. She stacked the dishes on the windowsill. I really hadn't got much idea about penicillin, you understand. I was just letting stuff go moldy and hoping for the best. Why are you looking at me like that? She said. Uther Pendragon? From Cornwall? You knew him? Yeah, heard of him. He had a castle called Tintagel. He was the father of... She was staring at me. I tried again. He was a king here? Yes. I didn't know what to say to her. I wandered over to the window and looked out. There was nothing much out there except forest. Not clear forest like you'd find Tolkien's elves in, but deep, damp forest, all mosses and punkwood. It was creeping back over the fields. Too many little wars, too many people dying. Not enough people to plow the fields, and out there somewhere was the true king? Waiting for his chance, waiting for... me? The king. Not any old king, the king. Arthur. Artos the Bear. Once and future. Round Table. Age of Chivalry. He never existed. Except here. Maybe. Maybe here, in a world that you get to in a broken time machine. A world that's not exactly memory, and not exactly story. And I was the only one who knew how the legend went. Me, Mervyn. With his leadership and my experience, what a team we would... I looked at her face, clear as a pond now, but a little worried. She was thinking that old Mervyn was going to be ill again. I remember I drummed my fingers on the cold windowsill. No central heating in the castle. Winter was coming, and it was going to be a bad one in this ruined country. Then I said, "Oh!" She looked startled. I'm just practicing," I said, and tried again. "Oh, hear me, hear me." Not bad, not bad. "Hear me, oh ye men of Albion, hear me. It is I, Mervyn," that's with a V, "who speaks to you. Let the message go out that a sign has been sent to end the wars and choose the rightwise king of Albion. Oh!" She was near to panic by this time. A couple of servants were peering around the door. I sent them away. "How was it?" I said. "Impressive, eh? Could probably work, yeah?" "What is the sign?" she whispered. "Traditionally, a sword and a stone," I said, "which only the rightful heir can pull out." "But how can that be?" "I'm not sure. I'll have to think of a way." That was months ago. The obvious way was some sort of bolt mechanism or something. No, of course, I didn't think there was a mystical king out there. I kept telling myself that. But there was a good chance that there was a lad who looked good on a horse and was bright enough to take advice from any wizardly types who happened to be around. Like I said, I'm a practical man. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, yes. All the mechanical ways of doing it, I had to rule out. That left electricity. Strange thing is, it's a lot easier to make a crude electrical generator than a crude steam engine. The only really critical things are the bearings. And the copper wire. It was Nimue who eventually sorted that one out. "I've seen ladies wearing fine jewelry with gold and silver wires in it," she said. "The men who make them must know how to do it with copper." And of course, she was right. I just wasn't thinking straight. They just pulled thin strips of metal through tough steel plates with little holes in them, gradually bullying it into smaller and smaller thickness. I went to London and found a couple who could do it, and then I got a blacksmith to make up some more draw plates because I didn't want wire in jewelry qualities, I wanted it in industrial amounts. I had already got quite a reputation by then, and nobody asked me what I needed it for. I mean, I could have said, well, half of it will be for the generator and the rest will be for the electromagnets in the stone, and what would they have possibly known? I had another smith make me up some soft iron cores and the bearings, and Nimue and I spent hours winding the wire and shellacking every layer. Getting the motive power was simpler. The country was thick with mills. I chose a tide mill because it's dependable, and this one was on an impressive stretch of coast. I know, the legend says it was done in London or Winchester or somewhere, but I had to go where the power was, and anyway, it looked good there on the shore with the surf pounding on the rocks and everything. The stone was the easy bit. There's been crude concrete technology ever since the Romans, though. If I do say so myself, I made quite a nice-looking stone around the electromagnets. We got it finished days before the day I had set for the big contest. We'd put up a big canvas shield around it, although I don't think any of the locals would have come near it for a fortune. Nimue operated the switch while I slid the sword in and out. "That means you're king," she said, grinning. "Not me. I haven't got what it takes to rule." "Why? What does it take?" "We'll know it when we see it. We're looking for a boy with the air of authority. The kind of lad a war-weary people will follow. And you're sure you'll find him? If I don't, the universe isn't being run properly. She's got this funny way of grinning. Not exactly mocking, but it always made me feel uneasy. And he'll listen to you? Well, he'd better. I'm the wizard around here. There's not a man in this country I cannot outthink, my girl. I wish I were as clever as you, Mervyn, she said, and grinned again. Silly little thing. And now, back to the present. Time travel, your mind wanders. Back to this rocky shore. And the stone. And the sword. Hold it. Hold it. I think. Yes. Yes, this looks like the one. A slight young lad, not swaggering at all, but strolling up to the stone as if he's certain of his fortune. Ragged clothes, but that's not a problem. That's not a problem at all. We can do something about those later. People are moving aside. It's uncanny. You can see destiny unfolding, like a deck chair. Can't see much under his hood. It's one of those big floppy ones the peasants wear, but he's looking directly at me. I wonder if he suspects. I wonder if he's real. I wonder where he's been hiding all these years. Well, never mind that. Got to seize the moment. Shift my weight slightly so my foot comes off the buried switch, cutting off the current to the rock. Good lord, he's not even making an effort, and up comes the sword. Sweet as you like. And everyone's cheering, and he's waving the thing in the air, and the sun is coming out and catching it in a way that I couldn't even arrange if I had tried. Ping! And it's done. They'll have to stop squabbling now. They've got their king, and no one can argue with it because they've all seen the miracle. Bright new future, etc., etc., and of course, he'll need some good advice from someone. Someone just like me. And he throws back his hood, and she lets her blonde hair fall out, and the crowd goes ice quiet. We're not talking about damsels here. She's smiling like a tiger, and it looks like she could do considerable damage with that sword. I think the word I'm looking for is imperious. She's daring them to protest, and they can't. They've seen the miracle. And she doesn't look like the kind of person who needs advice. She looks far too intelligent for my liking. She still looks like I first saw her at Ector's, with that bright stare that sees right into a man's soul. God help the little kings who don't come to heel right now. I glance at Nimue. She is smiling an innocent little smile to herself. I can't remember. She had said child. I can remember that, but did she ever actually say son? I thought I was controlling the myth, but maybe I was just one of the players. I bend down to Nimue's ear. Just out of interest, I say, what is her name? Didn't catch it the first time. Ursula, she says, still smiling. Ah, from the Latin for bear, I might have guessed. Oh well, nothing for it. I suppose I'd better see if I can find enough decent, seasoned timber for a round table, although for the life of me I can't imagine who's going to sit around it. There's not just going to be a lot of thick-headed knights in tin pants, that's for sure. If I hadn't meddled, she'd never have had a chance. And what chance does she have anyway? Like, what chance? But I have looked into her eyes as she stared into mine, and I can see the future. I wonder how long it's going to be before we discover America. And that is the end of that particular story. So, if you have enjoyed this little experimental diversion, then feel free to leave a like, comment, and or subscribe down below. In fact, since this is an experimental thing, it's extra important that it gets, some likes so that the algorithm doesn't punish me just for putting it up. So if you want to help me out, you can do those things. I also have a Patreon, a merchandise store, and a tip jar. If you want to use any of them, I'll be very grateful for the help. And if not, that's completely okay as well. Thank you very much for watching, and indeed for listening. And, remember to wash your hands, and if you go outside, do everybody a favor, and wear a mask. And wear a mask.